what explains something like the housing cycle? Why are there increases in prices of houses and then collapses of price of houses? And secondly, how is that related to construction industry as a whole? So for example, in business investments as well. And how does that relate to, or how can you explain the differences between countries, for example, like Germany, where there's a different housing cycle perhaps,
yeah.
or Japan than Britain or America? Is it a universal phenomena, or is it a localized phenomena affected by specific phenomena?
Well, there's something universal about it. First of all, that builders won't build houses unless they're going to get the return on it, because it's just another profitable industry like another one. It's a capitalist industry that goes for profit. Of course, there is government building of housing, so that makes the market a little bit different in certain places. But the private sector is the dominant form in most of the house building areas of the world, particularly in Europe and in the United States. But although there are still public sector housing, so that distorts the housing market a bit. But on the whole, what drives that is the ability to get the return over a period of years for the building of the house and making a profit on that. And generally, it seems that around about 18 years is what's required to get the full return on the house. So if a builder builds a house for, say, £100,000 or $100,000, and it has to borrow that money at a certain interest rate, the rents or the price broken down over a period of 18 years brings him the sufficient return to make it worthwhile to have a new cycle of housing. So there's a certain fundamental process of housing cycle which seems to be about 18 years. So from trough to trough in house prices tend to take that 18-year period. So it goes up for 15 years and then drops for 3 years, and then you start again. That's a sort of cycle. In addition to that, we have to say this particularly last housing cycle, which began at the bottom in about 1991-92, and therefore would be at the next bottom approximately 2010 if the housing cycle was correct. And it looks as though it was dead on, because we are now moving into 2010 and the housing market is probably bottomed or is about to bottom in the major economies towards the end of it, maybe now or by early next year at least. So that 18-year cycle is there. But this one has been particularly strong and particularly fast in its fall because it's been fueled by a huge amount of easy credit, of low interest rates, of the fact that the financial sector and banks and others have jumped on this as an asset to speculate in, to invest in property, to invest in property bonds too, the bonds that come from housing, and to spread them around the world as a way of making extra money over and over again, creating more and more capital. This isn't real, a fictitious form of capital on top of the housing asset itself. So this has been a particularly large credit bubble based on this housing cycle. So this housing cycle troughed exactly as we collapsed and troughed in the same way as previous ones have, but from a much higher level because it's been boosted by this credit boom, particularly from about 2002 onwards in many economies. So it's been a really bad one, but it just means that we're now at the bottom, and we're probably entering another 18-year housing cycle, most of which will be up from this point.
Well, one thing came in my head just now, but there was something else I was thinking of before. So Marx's concept was based upon abstractions from analysing what processes were taken on society. So he drew us up the labour theory of value, the concept of capital, labour, as abstractions taken from not from specific data, whereas you're relating it down to specific data.
Marx didn't have an opportunity to look at any real data. It wasn't the sort of data where you could get profit rates and you could get the amount of profit in the economy.
So how does one do that? How have you done that?
Well, but he was able to draw about the movement because of crises and cycles of up and down for profits in general. He was able to make a judgment, and he also felt that it was clear that what drove this particular system was profits, as I said before, and therefore we had to analyse where profits came from, which is what he did. He says basically it doesn't come from the fact that capitalists in some way obligingly give us money to invest, and that's how the profit comes. It only comes if workers produce more than they actually get in wages. That's where profits come from. Then they're distributed amongst bankers and manufacturers and others, within the capitalists themselves, but the profits come from the work of workers and the labour that they put into it. And so that was his big point that he wanted to make. But he said as soon as profitability goes down, that's when capitalism's got a problem. Now, but he didn't have the data to show that. But of course, in the 21st century and in the 20th century as well, we can start to get hold of that data, particularly for the major economies like the US and the UK. And how that's been done is that the big statisticians run by the governments have gone and collected the profit figures from all the companies, and they've aggregated them all together and come up with figures because they want to know what's happening, so that their economists and their strategists can make judgments about what to do for the economy. So that data has become more and more available. In fact, even statisticians have gone back into the 19th century and dug up figures that Marx would have been very happy to have at the time and didn't. And in the book there's a chapter about statistics that were in the 19th century for the UK to show how the profit cycle worked then. So we've been able to get a load of profitable figures. Now, those profit figures can be interpreted or analysed in different ways. Capitalists don't analyse profits in quite the same way as a Marxist would, because Marxists would say the profits are really whatever's over and above what the workers get in their wages is we can regard as the surplus value above that, and that's really the essence of profit. And we want to measure against that the amount that the capitalists have to invest in new machinery and plant and labour, and that gives us a profit rate. Well, that's not the same thing as the way the capitalists see a profit rate or profit, because they've got accountants and they want to deduct this, and they've got such things as depreciation, that's the wear and tear on capital, or they want to write things off, or they've got various other accounting purposes, so their profit figures can be heavily distorted from what the real profit is underneath the whole process.
So how does one?
So what you can do is you can look for you can take the data provided by the big statistical databases that the government has, and you can try and identify a Marxist way of looking at it. So you can look at the amount of wages that go to workers, you can look at the total production made in the economy, you can deduct something for the depreciation of wear and tear, and then you can come up with a profit figure which is more of a Marxist category. It doesn't actually differ too much from the profit rates that the capitalist accountants would also have, but it does to some extent. And the key thing in this book is that the cycle of 16 to 18 years for profits up and profits down, or profitability to be more exact, doesn't follow from the capitalist categories. They tend to be more out of line. For example, since about 2002, profits under the capitalist terms have rocketed upwards and didn't show any signs of coming down. But if you analyse them from a Marxist point of view, profitability has actually been declining over the period from 1997. It went down from 1997 to 2001, went up again to 2005, but never got back to 97 levels, and then fell again just before the crisis. So if you analyse it from a Marxist point of view, you get a better understanding of whether the crisis is going to happen than if you just look at the capitalist category.